Hi, my name is Grace Main, and today we will be taking a deeper dive into residential architecture in Detroit, Michigan. Before white settlers came to Detroit, the three fire tribes, the Ottawa, Ojibwa, and Potawatomi, lived in the region. A popular style of home for these Anishinaabe tribes was the wigwam. Constructed mostly of birch bark and reed mats, wigwams were durable and sturdy, yet easy to dismantle if needed. Later on, French and British settlers came to the Detroit area for reasons like fur trading and logging. In the 1700s, the majority of houses were wooden farmhouses and cottages located along the Detroit River as a source of transportation. This is the log cabin at Bowers Farm. In 1805, the Great Detroit Fire occurred, which burnt down nearly all of the wooden buildings and houses. Although this devastated the real estate of the city, newer houses and structures were put up with some help from the government, and this time, the people rebounded by building brick homes. In the mid-1800s, there was an influx of mostly Irish immigrants who came to Detroit for work opportunities. One of the oldest surviving buildings in Detroit housed many of these immigrants, bringing sometimes up to 10 people in one bedroom at the Workers' Row House. This house is in the Corktown neighborhood, which is Detroit's oldest surviving neighborhood. As the late 1800s rolled around, business tycoons like David Whitney, who was in the lumber industry, constructed mansions up Woodward Avenue. Many of these mansions still survive and now are repurposed as restaurants or as part of Wayne State University. The Whitney Mansion is known for its Romanesque revival style, which was very popular in the late 1800s and used as the style for many churches. The outside of the mansion is pink granite, and details like stained glass windows make it very popular. There were many more mansions in Brush Park, which was known at the time as the Little Paris of the Midwest. Many of these mansions were Victorian, Renaissance Revival, and Romanesque Revival, and there are around 300 of these houses and mansions built in the area. This area housed many of the wealthier families in the late 1800s and early 1900s, and some notable names would be Joseph Hudson of Hudson's Department Stores, architect Albert Kahn, and even David Whitney's first house. Over time, as automobiles became more common, many of the rich white families who lived in the neighborhood moved further out of the city. At this point, many Black and Jewish families moved into Brush Park, and because of the sheer size of these houses, many were used as multiple family houses like apartments, and many of the mansions ended up having stores on the first floor. Similarly to Brush Park, many well-known figures lived in the Boston Edison district. The neighborhood had approximately 900 houses, and people like Henry Ford, Ty Cobb, and the Fisher brothers lived there after benefiting from fame and the wealthy auto industry. The historic Boston Edison website describes the styles of the houses in the area. They say, "The eclecticism so enthusiastically embraced during the first quarter of the 20th century finds exuberant expression here. Styles include English Revival, Roman and Greek Revival, French Providential, Colonial Revival, Italian Renaissance, and Prairie and Vernacular." Now we are in the early 20th century, where new styles of residential architecture began to emerge with architects like Frank Lloyd Wright and Mies van der Rohe. Frank Lloyd Wright was one of the most influential architects of his time. His prairie-style houses were and continue to be some of the most popular in the Midwest. Recognizable features include long roof overhangs, wood paneling, bricks parallel to the ground, and overlapping or uneven stories. Seen in this video, there's an emphasis on horizontal lines, with the mortar on the tops and bottoms of the bricks being gray colored and more inset, while the mortar on the sides of the bricks are more level with the brick and painted red. These houses were usually centered around a large brick fireplace, and the materials used to build the houses were very natural, with mostly wood and brick. This is the Affleck House in Bloomfield Hills, Michigan. The next arts and crafts style houses that we are looking at are bungalows. Bungalow and craftsman style houses attempted to preserve architectural creativity in a time where industrialization was taking over. Sears Roebuck was a company that aided the arts and crafts movement. Families could order Sears Roebuck houses, and they would arrive with the materials needed and instructions, much like how people nowadays assemble IKEA furniture at home. Sears Roebuck kit houses are mostly found on the outskirts of Detroit and further away from the city. The most are found in Pontiac, but there's also a lot in Waterford, Royal Oak, Berkeley, where these videos are taken, in Clawson and Ferndale. Similarly to the prairie-style houses, craftsmen and bungalow builders used earthy materials and natural tones to construct the houses. As we come to Era 3, we see a theme of urban renewal, which displaced thousands upon thousands of Detroiters from their homes. In 1990, almost half of Americans were living in suburbia. Part of this move to the suburbs was because Henry Ford moved his plants right outside the Detroit city lines in Highland Park, Northville, and River Rouge. Furthermore, the cost of real estate was lower if it was only accessible by car, and therefore Detroiters who had cars moved outside of the city. With this influx of people to the suburbs, Levittown started popping up because the houses were fast to make and very homogeneous, and therefore didn't need much skilled labor. These houses were cheap to rent and later buy. While white people mostly flocked to the suburbs, African American people moved to the city. In the city, urban renewal was at its height. Thriving, predominantly black neighborhoods like Black Bottom and Brush Park were completely destroyed through highway projects and demolition. Black Bottom and Paradise Valley were paved over, displacing around 130,000 people. Brush Park was also hit by urban renewal, and many of the original mansions were torn down and the neighborhood was completely abandoned. It was, however, developed as a historic district in 1980. With 130,000 people needing to find homes, there's a solution in Lafayette Park. After Black Bottom was paved over, many people moved to this area of Detroit. These houses in Lafayette Park were built by Mies van der Rohe. The houses display many floor-to-ceiling windows that let in a lot of natural light, and the green spaces between the apartments add to the natural theme. Furthermore, van der Rohe was prepared for the popularity of cars, and for that reason, he made the parking lots more nestled in the ground to keep the aesthetic appeal. In 2008, the Great Recession hit Detroit hard, and this was all part of the housing crisis it was experiencing. According to ACLU Michigan, nearly 45,000 homes were vacant by 2008. This is a clip from a podcast by Al Letson.
After the housing crash of 2008, the average property in Detroit lost 3/4 of its value, but it took nearly a decade for the city to lower its assessments enough to reflect that.
Since the recession, the City of Detroit, outside organizations, and corporations have tried to get more people affordable housing. The Detroit Housing for the Future Fund is funded by many large Detroit businesses and preserves low-interest loans for houses, and it aids people in finding affordable places to live. One of the projects that the DHFF is doing is the Aussie Art Apartments, which we're going to have 30 units for rent, and half of those units are being set aside for household incomes of $60,000 or less. Detroit has had its ups and downs with housing over the years. However, restoration and new growth of these houses are crucial for rebuilding a thriving Detroit.